ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the all-inclusive Mega Man X Retrospective. This time it's the 5th installment of the main series, Mega Man X5 for the PlayStation 1. It's been almost 2 months of the time of writing since my review of X4, and I've gained a lot of subs since then. So before watching this review, it's heavily recommended that you check out my reviews of X1, X2, X3, and X4 before watching this one. I've also done a review of Mega Man Extreme 1 for the Game Boy Color, however that one really isn't a factor for this review. I played all 4 of these games again since I deleted the footage I had for those videos, so with that said, I figured it would be important to discuss some things about X3 before moving on. I would do X1, X2, and X4 as well, but that would just be redundant since my opinions really haven't changed. It has been assumed that after my review, I hate X3 and think it's some ungodly mess, but no, this isn't the case. X3 is a blast to play. The weapons are some of the best in the series, the music is great, the replayability is so strong, but this comes at a cost. Mega Man X3 is held together by popsicle sticks and glue, and it's quite noticeable with how rushed and poorly thought out many of the ideas in the game are, like Zero, the enhancement chips, and the list goes on. Point is, recently, a new version of the Zero project was released, and this allows you to get any ride armor and use it without having to get the first one. I thought this would be a big deal and really open the game up, however I was wrong. It's a nice feature, but that doesn't really change much in the grand scheme of things when it comes to finding the fastest way to 100% the game. That's when it dawned on me just how rigid Mega Man X3 is. There's really only one good way to 100% it, and anything else will result in backtracking that goes entirely against the design philosophy of X1, and especially X2, where you can get any upgrade in almost any order, whereas X3 is just not like that. Trust me. This theme is really important to this review, and we'll be coming back to it later. With all that said and done, that leads us swimmingly into the topic of today's episode, Mega Man X5. There is a ton of ground to cover this time around, so let's start off by talking about how this game was originally meant to be the finale of the Mega Man X series, which would lead right into the Mega Man Zero lineup on the Game Boy Advance, but obviously, that didn't go according to plan, since a whole 5 new X games came out after this game. The game also came out a couple of years after X4, which was rare for Mega Man standards at the time. So how'd it turn out after all that time? Well, the popular opinion on X5 is split straight down the middle. There are a lot of people who think X5 is one of the worst games in the series, for many reasons. And similarly, there are many people who think this is one of the best of the X series. When I first played this game, I just come off of not being a big fan of X3 or X4, and then I played X5 and it blew me away. My first playthrough of X5 was a ton of fun, as I enjoyed the levels, the story, and the weapons quite a bit. At the time, I ranked it the second best in the series behind X1. When I played the other 3 sequels more and more, as well as playing X5 again, I quickly noticed the flaws of X5 and went from one of the best for me and began going down in the ranks. As usual, I played this game several times for this video with a critical eye being open at all times. So how does Mega Man X5 fare under said critical lenses? Let us start by examining the storyline. X5 begins sometime after X4 and a new villain by the name of Dynamo has arrived on the scene to give our heroes grief. Dynamo works for Sigma, who, obviously, is back again. Sigma attacks Eurasia City, but X and Zero easily wipe him out. However, this was his plan all along, since defeating him releases the Sigma virus all over the Earth, and meanwhile, Dynamo has fulfilled his task of setting up the space colony known as Eurasia to crash land onto the Earth, further releasing the virus. So now the Maverick Hunters have 16 hours to stop it by collecting pieces to power their laser cannon. And if that fails, they have to collect pieces to power their rocket ship to destroy the colony. New characters in the team include Alia, the data analysis and mission support, Douglas, the technical support, and Cygnus, the head of the Hunters. When the space colony is destroyed, X and Zero must take the fight to Sigma. Problem being that this can go down in like 3 different ways. One where the laser cannon destroys the colony, and then X and Zero fight Sigma. The rocket destroys the colony, and X and Zero fight Sigma. Or the rocket fails and Zero is overloaded with the virus, and turns into a Maverick, which was what his purpose was all along. X and Zero then have the final battle the series has been building towards since X2's ending, followed by the bad ending. If Zero doesn't go Maverick, then there still is a fight but over different circumstances, which is followed by the good ending. Either way, Zero dies in a sacrifice to save X. Again. After Sigma's defeat, in the good ending, X takes Zero's Z-Saber to honor him in future battles, and in the bad ending, X has his memory erased of Zero by Dr. Light. Yes, I know it's a bit messy, but stick with me. With this, he has all the same memories from before, just no recollection of Zero. Zero also has an ending if you beat the game as him, but all it is Zero's last moments before dying, so nothing much to write home about. The story, despite being a bit convoluted to describe, I actually think is really good. Coming off the lame plots of the previous 2 games, X5's story has stakes throughout, with the looming threat of a global catastrophe being present the whole time. The climax is great, and Zero's struggle to fight his inner Maverick was really engaging, and in my first playthrough it really kept me on the edge of my seat to find out whatever might happen next. I also really enjoyed how the bosses all have their own backstory and mission. And so they talk with X and Zero before the boss, and we find out tidbits like how Squid Adler was in close contact with Launch Octopus, or how the Skyver was with Repliforce. Stuff like this is just good world building, since it establishes that there's more going on to this world and characters than just what X and Zero are doing, which, as established in my Jak 2 review, is something I like in a game. The presentation of the story is unfortunately not as grand, though. This game ditches the anime cutscenes of X4 in favor of these incredibly lazy text boxes with pictures coming on screen. Just static pictures, and it's really boring to look at. X6 had better cutscenes in my honest opinion, and since the cutscenes are unskippable, unlike how they were in X4 and X6, it's made especially worse since you have to mash through these poorly presented cutscenes on every playthrough. With that said and done, let us finally move into the real meat of X5. The intro stage is again fairly simple with tutorials to the new additions to X and Zero's moveset, since yes, there are new abilities this time around. First of them being the duck, which speaks for itself as to how it works, but it actually was quite useful when playing, since you could dodge certain obstacles you wouldn't be able to before. The other new ability is the grapple mechanic, which allows X and Zero to latch onto ropes, which can lead to some interesting level design as the game goes along, with enemies being placed on the ropes so you can carefully time your dashes through it. So I give both of these new mechanics an A+, since I think they're positive additions to the Mega Man X formula. Besides that, X and Zero are pretty much left unchanged from X4, since X can still charge his shots for a bigger blast and use special weapons, and Zero can still use his Z-Saber for up-close attacks, and it's still very satisfying. Same goes for the rest of the returning maneuvers such as dashing and wall jumping, which are still here and accounted for. That brings us to the level design, which is the first time that X5 begins to fall apart. For the most part, levels in X5 are fun to play and contain what I'm looking for in an X game with fast-paced action and memorable set pieces, like Grizzly Slash's stage where you have to get from train car to train car before they blow up with a wealth of enemies in your path. Squid Adler's stage is some really enjoyable block puzzles where you have to find out how to get both in their sockets at the same time so you can progress. One of the best levels in the game is Izzy Glow's stage where you have to make your way through a castle filled to the brim with deadly traps and laser security, as well as regular enemies and spikes to stop you. Also, Axel the Red stage is pretty good since it makes incredible use of the rope mechanic in a wide variety of ways, such as ascending through a spiked shaft or over a bottomless pit. This part encourages patience since enemies pop out of the ceiling as a punishment for rushing. However, this is never unfair since you're introduced to this mechanic earlier in the stage in an instant kill-free environment. With that said, that's where the level design of the stages just falls flat in its face. The Skyver stage is annoying at first with a ton of bombs that you need to dispose of, and then it becomes a do-or-die snooze fest filled with long elevator sequences you must sit through in order to progress. And slow waiting is exactly what I don't want in an X game. The Matrix stage is fine for the most part, except when it splits into two at the end, and the bottom path is lava that you need a ride armor to traverse through, or else it's an instant kill. Dark Dizzy's stage would have also been fine, but at the beginning, every few steps a black hole opens in the background, which causes an enormous amount of slowdown that really kills the pace of the game, yet again. I'm now convinced that this was intentional, since the version of X5 on the Mega Man X collection fixes the slowdown issue. Since if it was a technical issue, then the rest of the game would have slowdown as well, but this is the only case where that happens. In addition to that, it only ever happens when this effect is on the screen. So I don't know why they designed the level that way, but they did. After that, the stage becomes fairly typical with some basic reverse gravity puzzles. By the way, even Squid Adler's stage isn't all sunshine and rainbows, since it starts off with a ride chaser segment like Jet Stingray, and despite its short length, it sure leaves an impact. So many do-or-die moments, items you have to collect, it sucks even more than Jet Stingray. No matter how bad any of that stuff might be though, I've saved this level for last. That being Duff McWhalen. Jesus Christ, how did they do it so badly? First, this level is an auto-scroller, and it has no hurry to get a move on, and so I have to sit through this tedious slog every time with predictable attacks from this tank and obvious obstacles all over the place, and dying once means you do a whole section of it again. One of the reasons why it sucks will be revealed much later in this video, but we'll get back to that. As of right now, all I need to say is, this is one of the worst levels in the franchise since it's so monotonous and drawn out, since it's also one of the longest levels in the game. Like I said, there are many more reasons why it's terrible. But for right now, I'll just say, this level has made me want to stop playing this game on multiple occasions when recording footage, and especially when 100%ing this game, or even in general. I'll just be playing, and I'll get here, and I ask myself, do I really want to play through this again? And promptly turn it off, because this level is awful. Next, this isn't a level design problem, but it's a huge pace breaker. Alia. Dear God. Alia will call you every time something happens to tell you how to proceed. She says some of the most obvious shit in the world. Like not dying in pits, or having to rush to get off an exploding train car, or anything stupid like that. Did the developers really have that little faith in the players? Sometimes Alia will interrupt you mere seconds after her last interruption to say, again, obvious crap like the path splitting into two. Oh my god, who thought this was a good idea? Seriously, this is a huge problem, and it kills the pace of several stages. Yes, I know you can mash your way through it, but this isn't the point I'm making here. It also doesn't matter if it personally doesn't bother you. What matters is this question: how is the Mega Man X series better off with crap like this? Answer is, it's not. This again doesn't ruin the game, but I cannot tell why they just didn't put in an option in the menu to just disable it, since they have a bunch of other stupid options in there that I'll get into later. Moving on, remember how X4 simplified the gameplay? Well, X5 brings us right back to Mega Man X3 territory, which is not a compliment. There are 10 whopping light capsules in this game, 4 containing parts for the Falcon armor, 4 containing parts of the Gaia armor, which having 2 completely sets of armor is new for this series, so I will give it that, and the other 2 we'll get into later. Firstly, by selecting X at the beginning, players are granted the 4th armor from X4, which is great since that was the best armor in the series. With it comes the plasma shot, and as opposed to unlimited ammo, the amount you use is just reduced. When playing X5, be sure to pick X in the beginning for many reasons. One just being because the 4th armor is so great, and mainly because X5, unlike X4, is one shared adventure for our 2 heroes, and by picking X, Zero can still use his Z-Saber to the same effect as X4. By picking Zero, the player is given the Z-Buster. And no, it's not like it was in X3. It instead stops Zero in place and shoots a pathetic blast with a ridiculous wind-up period and not much damage done. Picking Zero means you're left with no 4th armor for X, and have to use his default blue form if you want to play as him. It's not horrible to play as regular X, but the game is much harder if you choose to play as him since he can't react as well to obstacles that his armors or Zero can overcome with ease. You might be saying, they'll just play as Zero then. Trust me, I'll get back to that. Point is, the menu should not have been designed like this since it looks just like the one in X4 indicating multiple playthroughs. But instead, all this does is pick between the 4th armor and the Z-Buster, and so I'm warning you now, pick the 4th armor. It's way better than the Z-Buster. Back to the armors, first I'm going to mention that in this game, Dr. Light now apparently is an AI, whereas in the other games he was a pre-recorded message. I say this since Light has a full-on conversation with Zero and mentions Alia as well as being the one who erases Zero from X's memory in the climax of the bad ending. Moving on, the armors in X5 have a new problem. Since there are 2 of them and X already potentially has the 4th armor, you don't get the armor pieces stacked on top of X like before, which is lame, but I understand that they did it because it would be weird to have parts mixed and matched. This is an issue that wouldn't be remedied till Mega Man X8. So with that said, it's harder to describe what the individual parts do since they all come together as a whole to make one function. Sometimes we aren't even told what the part even does at all, like the head parts of the Gaia armor. Literally, this thing has no stated use, you just have to get it because of course you do. Anyway, the Falcon armor has a really pathetic charge shot and can't charge special weapons, but it can allow X to fly in any direction for a few seconds, which is really fun to mess around with in the stages. But it doesn't get much more complicated than that. The Gaia armor allows X to walk on spikes and not die, as well as offering a limited and range buster shot and instantly charged shot. It's limited mobility since it's slower and doesn't dash as far as the rest, and the Gaia armor is also completely incompatible with special weapons. Initially, I, like many others, only used the Gaia armor to collect the heart tanks that needed to be collected. However, I did use it on a boss and was impressed with how easy it was. So it's a pick your poison deal. Easy levels and more difficult bosses, or vice versa. Between the 2, I'd pick the Falcon armor for more mobility in the stages, although the 4th armor is my default pick if the item collection is not a factor. The last 2 capsules can be found in one of the last levels. If you go in as no armor X, you're granted the ultimate armor, and as Zero you get the black armor. This time around, the black armor actually increases Zero's stats, and the ultimate armor is unchanged from X4. Well, other than the color scheme. So breaking the game with the unlimited Nova Strike is just as fun as it was in X4. I like how you get these game-breaking powers in the last level since that keeps it fair, so you can't run wild in the Maverick stages with this. Although similar to X4, these armors are available through cheat codes as well, so feel free to do that if you wish. This game again has 8 heart tanks and 2 sub-tanks, which do the same thing they always have, but I just hate the fact that this game, throughout every stage, does not have a single good sub-tank grind spot, which every X game up to this point has had. So again, how do they drop the ball on that? So if you need sub-tank energy since reloading a save file empties your tanks, you're screwed. A weird inconsistency is that when one character gets a heart tank, the other characters do not get it. But at the same time, getting a sub-tank is shared between the 2 characters, which is fine on paper, but we will talk about how bad this is later. The returning weapon energy tank gets more use in this game than before since X doesn't have an option for unlimited ammo. Is how the EX tank is back, bringing your max lives from 2 to 4, but the problem is, X5 practically gives you unlimited lives anyway, since getting a game over on the boss just sends you back to the boss door, so lives aren't even a concern in this game. So what's the point of having an EX tank at that point? Might as well make another sub-tank, or would that just take too much effort? However, you know what? All that would be forgiven if it wasn't for the biggest issue I have with this game, which, trust me, is a big one: the backtracking. It's at an all-time low for the X series. In all the previous games, you can control the amount of backtracking you do with your route throughout the game, since some orders are more efficient than others. This is why I like this series. The skill mastery that comes from finding an optimal route through the game. X1, X2, and X4 had this in spades. And even X3! Despite being a rigid game with only one good least backtracking order, at the bare minimum, there at least was a least backtracking order. This is the most rigid game in the franchise, since collecting items is just not fun and it's just plain monotonous. The boss weakness order might as well be your order, since anything else would just kill time in a 100% speed run. Why? Because so many items are gotten the exact same way. 4 of the heart tanks require the Gaia armor, but you need all 4 parts of that first, but you need all 4 parts of the Falcon armor before that. Some of the Gaia armor heart tanks can be gotten with the Falcon armor, but this is just suicide since you're gonna die by doing it that way. The other 4 heart tanks are just found lying on the ground in spaces that require no effort to find, which ruins the fun of finding them. Because of how the Gaia armor works with heart tanks, you have to revisit almost every level in the game. And even in some cases like the Skyver or the Matrix where you don't have to revisit it at all, the game compensates by making you revisit one level twice. Twice! What level might that be? Well, of course, had to be fucking Duff McWhalen's atrocious stage. About halfway through too, so you have to sit through this slog 3 times in a 100% playthrough. 3 times! Did no one see a problem with this utter garbage? What also never made sense to me was the fact that the light capsule here requires Duff McWhalen's weapon, even though other weapons would have perfectly sufficed. And then, you need the Gaia armor to get the heart tank as X, since Zero can do it with his electricity weapon, but for some reason X can't. So there's no way around it at this point. None at all! Also, some of these are just generally annoying to get, like the head parts of the Gaia armor, since you have to use the F laser and a really precise shaft to open a door. After all that complaining, I think you get the idea. So let's move on. Now let's talk about the Mavericks. X5, when playing as Naked X, these guys can put up a very decent fight, but at the same time the bosses are beatable. With the armors, the bosses are much easier, but still enjoyable since the bosses have fun to dodge patterns that hit pretty hard, but not to an obnoxious degree. Although with their weaknesses, these bosses are a complete joke, with mindless pattern resets for almost every boss, which is just lame. I don't know why almost every boss in the series has suffered from this. As Zero, you don't even need weaknesses, which of course only makes the bosses easier, but in general, Zero can kill bosses in no time with the Z-Saber itself. Honestly, my favorite fights in this game are probably the ones where Dynamo tries to interrupt your progress in the vein of the Nightmare Police and the Colonel. When I'm playing as X, I'm not sure what Dynamo's weakness is, and so I find fighting him to be a fun skill test, since it requires precise timing to stay alive. And again, that's what I love in these games. As Zero, you can beat Dynamo in about 9 seconds, and I think that speaks for itself. Overall, the point is that bosses without their weaknesses as X are really fun, almost as good as X4. But with the weaknesses and playing as Zero, the bosses break harder than ever, which makes fighting bosses remarkably unsatisfying. However, the weapons in X5 are some of my favorites in the X series. The Tri-Thunder is great for fighting enemies below you since it goes down and then goes across the ground, or the F-Laser, which when charged up creates a massive blast blowing away everything in its path. The other weapons like the C-Slash, the Spike Ball are alright, but aren't my favorite to use since the 4th armor is so devastating by itself. For Zero, many of his abilities from X4 are back and are just recycled with a new coat of paint, like how his fire ability in X4 is replaced with the electricity one, or how his ice ability is replaced with a fire ability, although I really find myself using one of his new moves, the Twin Dream, a lot since it extends Zero's reach by quite a bit. Which brings us to the part system. Oh god, this game is a time-based system. How this works is that by getting a game over and going back to the stage select or by beating a stage, 1 hour goes by. When like 8 hours are left, beating a boss grants you the ability to choose between weapons and life plus or weapons and energy plus. Picking one gives you the parts like the burst shot for X, or extending Zero's Z-Saber, or allowing X to do charge shots without charging, which is fine. However, why did they design it so you have to pick between these two options, since they don't even describe what you're getting at all? There is a set order to it, I'm pretty sure, but it's so convoluted since they could have just had a shop where you use currency to buy parts. But I guess that would make sense, and this game doesn't really care about that. I always pick weapons in Life Plus, and from that I tend to get my preferred ones like the Ultimate Buster, the Speed Shot, and the Burst Shot, or the jumper parts that increase jump height, as well as the Antivirus Guard. Oh wait, I never talked about that. I guess to show how powerful the Sigma virus has become, a physical manifestation of it appears during levels and comes for you, and a good detail is that by getting touched by it as X too many times makes you weaker, whereas 0 it makes you stronger, which ties into the story arc of the game. With that said, the part system as a whole is a good idea that was botched pretty poorly if I'm honest, since it's so vague on how to get them, and you aren't even told what they do, you just have to figure it out. We're nearing the end of the game, folks, and with that, it brings us to one of the stupidest and biggest problems with X5 to the forefront. X5, like I said earlier, makes X and 0 go through 4 stages to collect parts to power up the Enigma cannon to destroy Eurasia. However, no matter what you do, the Enigma from my experience is about a 99.9% fail rate, meaning that it didn't do anything most of the time, and that you must play the following 4 stages to collect parts for the rocket ship, and then most of the time that will destroy the colony and proceed to the last levels. By the way, you can preemptively fire the cannon and launch the rocket, but you're practically guaranteed to fail from that, so I don't recommend it. But you can use this to bypass the Maverick stages and cut right to the first castle stage, but why would you do that? How is this flawed? Well, because the outcomes are completely random number generated, or RNG for short. As to what the outcomes of the Enigma and the Shuttle will be, so you could collect all 8 parts, fire the Enigma, and fail. Or you could collect the 4 necessary parts for it and succeed, or most likely fail. I went ages thinking the Enigma was guaranteed to fail and actually succeeding was some kind of glitch or something. But no, when I played through this game, I actually got it to work, when I didn't do anything differently than any other playthrough. The game just arbitrarily decided that was going to be the outcome. This isn't a horrible thing by itself, but the problem is with the Shuttle. That's RNG too, for the same reasons as before, but this comes at a huge cost. The Shuttle succeeding is what decides whether or not 0 is good in the end, or not, and this is left to RNG, and not your actions. What a stupid way to design a game. When the Shuttle fails, the player loses access to 0 permanently for the rest of the game. If you picked X, this isn't a big deal since you have the 4th armor to balance out the sudden difficulty spike if you played as 0 for most of the adventure, but, and this is a huge possibility, you picked 0, and not X, and you played as 0 the whole time, powered him up with all the heart tanks you could find, since 0 can only get 4 of them because previously discussed issues, then you're screwed and left with no armor X. Oh my god. From here, you only have 2 options. Go to the castle levels as no armor, no heart tank X, which I do not recommend since it's practically suicide, or go back to every single level in the entire game just to get the collectibles you didn't bother with as 0 just to possibly stand a chance in the castle as Falcon or Gaia Armor X. This is a big problem, one that cannot be overlooked since it can kill any fun the last stages could possibly offer you. To add insult to injury, on my second playthrough of X5, through the power of RNG, I had the Shuttle fail on me and 0 goes Maverick. I then turned the game off and pondered what I could have done wrong, until I picked it up again and reloaded my save file from the previous cutscene, only to then see the Shuttle succeed before my very eyes, and my mind was blown because it was then that I realized it was RNG, and of course I labeled it as a huge failure, and it is. And again, it doesn't matter if you personally aren't bothered by this. What matters is that they never should have thought that this was a good idea to begin with. Ugh, Jesus. Anyway, before we move on to the final levels of the game, let us address a few other things worth mentioning. Mega Man X5 has multiple settings in the options menu for you to choose from, which will be a standard in the series going forward. The options consist of multiple difficulty selections. Easy mode reduces enemies on the screen and bosses don't level up with each boss defeated, as well as meaning that the part system doesn't exist in easy mode as a result. I prefer playing X5 in easy mode for a few reasons that I'll explain in a few minutes. Extreme mode pretty much just increases the amount of enemies on the screen and I think boss damage, so play at your own risk, since sometimes the enemy placement can be a bit ridiculous. I should mention that this review has been based on the normal difficulty setting since it is the default option when hitting start. Also, you have the option to play the game at 50% speed, which sounds really stupid, but I can actually imagine it coming in handy in levels like Squid Adler and the first Sigma stage. Again, I don't know why they bothered putting stuff like this in, and yet never thought to include an option to get Alia to stop interrupting you every few feet, but alas, this is how it is. Anyway, the presentation of X5 is a mixed bag. The sprite work is just as good as X4, but it doesn't look as good in many areas like Izzy Glow's stage, which goes for a similar effect to Split Mushroom, but the camera angle makes the whole set piece look really cheap and just bland. That also goes for other parts of X5, like where the final boss is just a pre-rendered background, or the lazy cutscenes. As what was intended to be the last hurrah for the X series, I think the presentation just doesn't feel like enough effort went into it. Where I do think effort went would have to be the amount of fan service in X5. Not just for the X series, but the classic series as well, since the intro theme was like the Weapon Get screen of Mega Man 3. Or how Quickman stage from Mega Man 2 is redone in this game, and the Yellow Devil from Mega Man 1 returns and morphs into Wily Capsule 6 from Mega Man 6. The intro movie also has many callbacks to the events of the previous games, like X's final showdown with Sigma and Zero's sacrifice from X1, or X battling the X-Hunters and Zero destroying the fake Zero from X2, or Third Armor X battling Vile Mark II and Zero fighting Bit from X3. And finally, X fighting Double, and Zero dueling with Colonel from X4. Would have loved it if the stupid crying scene from Extreme 1 was here, but whatever. The game's presentation might be lacking, but on the other hand, X5 has hands down one of my favorite soundtracks in the entire X series. Whether it be themes that fit right in with the rest of the series, or entirely new themes that have never had anything akin to them in the other games. All the way down to remixes of great classic Mega Man and Mega Man X themes. The soundtrack is just bursting at the seams with variety, and overall doing a great job portraying the atmosphere the game is going for. The final levels in particular are phenomenal. The stages leading up to the fight between X and Zero sets the mood quite well, given how the whole series was building up to this moment. After that's done and over with, X or Zero then make their way to defeat Sigma for the 6th and final time. Yeah, right. But regardless of that, I love the theme that plays here. With that said, I guess now I have to stop wasting time and go on to the actual final levels. Ugh. They are dreadful. The first one in particular is one of the worst levels in the series. I said already this is a homage to Quickman stage, but this isn't a good thing. That level was atrocious. Here, it might just be worse, since you have to dodge these laser traps coming your way, and the fucking camera focuses on you the whole time, meaning it will be almost impossible to react appropriately, which leads to your death over and over and over again. Yes, you can use the dark hole to freeze time to get through here no problem, but that doesn't change the crap design this place is the physical manifestation of. Don't even get me started on this stage in extreme mode. There are literally lasers everywhere, not a single second of breathing room present at all. The boss? It's horrible. It's the Yellow Devil from Mega Man 1, but that fight was terrible, so this isn't a good thing since you have to dodge projectiles moving in completely random patterns, and to make it worse, he hits like a tank. It takes forever to beat. Since this is Mega Man X and not Mega Man Classic, you can cling onto the wall and mash the shit out of the X button to survive, but this isn't fun or fair design in the slightest. Also, as Zero and No Armor X, this boss is pretty much impossible to beat, so don't even try is my recommendation. I don't have much else to say about the next level, other than the boss that again sucks. It's a flashback to the wall boss of X1, but it's far more complicated with each component having a different weakness, which is fine, but the biggest problem is, again, how much damage it does, and the fact that these spikes just pop up out of nowhere and kill you in a heartbeat, which adds an extra layer of tedium on a boss that wasn't that fun to begin with in this game, due to how long and drawn out it is. The last stage is also fine with some good uses of the rope mechanic one last time before the curtain closes. But after that, jumping into this pit is where you find the ultimate armor and the black armor. But since this is X5, you only get the ultimate armor when you're naked X, and even then, you have to return to the stage select to use it. Which is really weird, since an inconsistency is how when you're 0 and the black armor is just given to you. And they take extra precaution to make sure that you know this ahead of time. They're like, are you sure you want to be more powerful? Yes. This is where X faces 0 and vice versa. The fight against normal 0 is fairly smooth sailing since it hits pretty hard but is quite beatable, and the same goes for 0 versus X. My favorite part of that fight being how he uses the ultimate armor for it, and where that uses plenty of weapons straight out of X4. But if you have the black armor and are willing to take pot shots, then you'll beat X in no time. The fight against Maverick 0 didn't give me too much trouble either, but I did die once as he hits like a tank. But luckily I had the Nova Strike on my side, so I managed. So I guess that brings me to the last level. This level is fine for the most part, but it suffers from a major problem, which is the boss rush. And again, similar to X4, the final boss and boss rush are in the same stage, which is even worse since leaving the stage means doing the boss rush again. This is a bigger issue here since on normal and extreme mode, all the bosses have health bars that large. My god, I've been complaining about how boring and slow the boss rushes have been since X2, and they never fixed it once. This time, they artificially heighten the difficulty by dragging it out even longer. Problem is that it isn't even harder, it's just boring since most of the weapons don't even have enough ammo to last that whole time to begin with. This is why I prefer playing X5 on easy, since the boss's health doesn't level up here, and so the obnoxious castle stage bosses and boss rush are made a hell of a lot better. But this is not a fix for crappy design. I think Sigma in this game is one of the hardest encounters with him in the series. The first phase can definitely wear your health bar down pretty quickly, but it isn't to say it's particularly difficult, he just hits hard. The final phase is definitely the difficult part since he has two hands that hit incredibly hard as well as attacks that are pretty annoying to dodge. Although I have my own method of doing this. With all that said and done, 0 dies, and then either the good or the bad ending ensues, thus bringing Mega Man X5 to a conclusion. With this review coming to an end, it's really interesting to look back and think about how this used to be one of my favorite games in the series. 2 years later, multiple playthroughs under my belt, and my opinion is everything but that. Mega Man X5 is a fine game to play. I enjoyed X5 since the core experience is as fun as always. The story was the best in the series, the soundtrack was incredible, and the weapons were a lot of fun to mess around with. However, I cannot ignore faulty level design, awful item collections, RNG endings, Alia, and so many other problems that lead me to say that I cannot honestly say that Mega Man X5 is a good game. Just by looking at how it was designed, it was clear that X5 is messy from start to finish. I can play X5, I can play it well, and have a good time doing so. But again, this game is just too flawed to be called outright good. Easily the weakest X game I've looked at so far. Would I rather play X5 over Mega Man Extreme? Yes, but that game was more coherently designed, honestly. In hindsight, Mega Man X5 was the start of a huge decline in quality that the X series had, not X6. Many of the problems those games have, those issues started here. The difference is, Mega Man X5 doesn't crash and burn because of its issues like the sequels did. Which is why, like I said, X5 is still a fun game at times. Overall though, as the intended finale to the X series, X5 leaves a lot to be desired. Can I recommend X5? Yes I can. If you enjoyed X1 to X4, then you will find things to like in this game as I have. Just be sure to not start with this game, since I think it'll leave a bad taste in your mouth. So anyway, that's X5. Well, you all know what's next. So let's not waste any time. The next review will be Mega Man X Stream 2 for the Game Boy Color. So I'll see you guys then.